Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com, and today I'm going to be reviewing a session I played at 2-4 PLO, six-handed. I guess I'll just get started. I want to apologize in advance. I am a little sick today, so if I sound a little different, or if I sniffle or sneeze on you, I'm sorry. Here I started the video up and a table broke, so I added another and started over. And posted in the cutoff, but I don't recommend posting in the cutoff. I'd been getting a lot of requests for PLO videos, six-handed PLO videos, and the reason I held off until now is that I wanted to start with some beginner content since a lot of players are new to the game, and a lot of players I know want to make the transition from No Limit to PLO. So I actually made a beginner video and watched it back and wasn't happy with it and thought it was kind of boring. And then when I was kind of thinking about how to make it better, I realized that beginner videos are just inherently boring sometimes, and I was going to have to make some boring basic videos if I wanted to make beginner videos. And I felt that I know you guys expect more out of me, and I didn't want to put out boring videos. So I think what we'll do is have some other pros who have a good understanding of PLO make some beginner PLO videos, and I'll kind of make my videos with the assumption that you know at least a little bit about PLO and have played some. So here I pick up a super premium hand, double suited kings with 9-8. It's got pretty much everything you can ask for, double suited, connected, pair of kings, both high suits. You know, if I got 4-bet here, I probably would just get it in. That could be wrong at 2-4 because I don't really have a great feel on the players here. But you're never that far behind. All right, so here it's a pretty good flop for me. It's not one that connects with many hands, so it's one that I think he might fight for quite a bit. Given that most 3-betting hands are high card hands, or at least even if they're rundown type hands, they're usually like a Jack 10 9-8. Not anything that touches this board. So I bet small, kind of hoping he'd either float with a pretty weak hand and then bluff when a heart hit, or that he would like make a small raise on the flop and then fold to a shove. Or that, you know, if he has a hand like jacks with hearts, that he would just jam it in right now, which I'd probably get the money in against a hand like that anyways. But I felt a smaller bet would make him more likely to float, and I thought that was my best shot of getting some money out of him, given that this board doesn't hit very many hands. He does call, and now I have 300 left with 200 in the pot, and given my plan on the flop of trying to induce a float, I check the turn, figuring that if he has a flush, he will either bet it now or on the river, and I'll be able to check raise. Obviously, I'm could be beat by the ace-high flush, but there's no way I'm folding. And that if he doesn't have a flush, he likely, if he had any kind of strong, like a set or two pair, I'd expect him to raise the flop. So I think if he doesn't have a flush here, he probably has a hand like 5-6, like, Queen Jack 5-6, and we'll turn that into a bluff now or on the river, or a hand like, I guess pretty similar, but like like King Queen 6-7, or maybe he floated like 7-8. Just something that was going to turn their hand into a bluff now that the hearts hit. And I expected that if he does have hearts, I look a whole lot like an overpair here, and I'd be able to get a check raise in against hearts later. And I go ahead with the same plan on the river. I pretty much give him the same kind of range. I think it's more likely he has a hand like 6-7 than a hand like 6-5, since a hand like 6-7 sometimes takes the free card to see if they hit the straight, and then if they don't hit the straight, they bluff on the 3-flush board, whereas a hand like 6-5 pretty much knows they're not good and don't have a ton of outs to improve, even though in actuality they have a similar amount of outs. I feel like those kind of hands bet the turn more often, rather than wait for the river. So I decided to go for the check raise on the river. I think at the very least it's good to have in your game. to be able to be check raising when you check the river, since usually I'll be check folding or check calling in that spot. And as it turns out, oh, I guess I didn't bring up. Okay, yeah, I did. As it turns out, he actually checked behind the queen high flush on 2 streets, which is really shocking to me. I'd never expect him to do that with that hand, and a play like that is either a very bad play or a very good play. And after playing with him a little more, I think I decided it was a very good play. He must have. I'm pretty sure I didn't give anything away with any kind of timing or sizing or anything like that, but most people just bet they're going to check 2 twice automatically when, he realized the risk of me folding a lot of hands and the risk of me check raising him. That said, I still think that unless he picked up something that I have no idea is a leak in my game, unless he picked up something on me, and maybe it's the fact that he thinks I would always be folding aces on this river, I probably would not fold aces on this river, or kings, given my assumptions about the flop, which I was talking about. So I actually, if I had a hand like kings here, I probably would have check called a river bet. So I do think that he missed a value bet, but I mean, in actuality, he made the correct play against my hand, and he does play pretty well from my experience playing with him in this quick session. So I'm obviously taking those notes on him. I know I mentioned this in my 6 max no limit video, at least in one of them, but I really love to be able to get turn and river check raises in whenever I can. Usually it's a good play in a vacuum, but it's also really important for metagame, being able to just not having your opponents be able to value bet you on the river without fear of being check raised. It's important to have people think you're capable of anything, and it's important to be capable of anything. I decided to go with 2 tables of 2-4 here. I know most of my videos have been at higher stakes, and I had the 4 tabling video and some 1 tabling videos. I thought I would just try a new format, and definitely will be open to hearing what you guys think about it. So here I have 3, 4, 5, 6 double suited, and I decided to 3-bet the under the gun raiser. The thing about this hand is that it's not. I think a lot of people overvalue this hand as I 3-bet, but it's not as strong as people think. People think 4 cards in a row double suited, it's absolute monster, and it is a pretty good hand, but having low cards like this gets you in a lot of trouble, and it especially gets you in a lot of trouble in multi-way pots. When you see flop 4 ways with a hand like this, your flushes will rarely be good, and a lot of your straight, you'll get straight over straighted a lot. And when you flop trips, you'll likely be outkicked. So this isn't a hand that I love to see flops multi-way with. I know it looks like a hand that you'd want to see multi-way with, since it's a speculative hand, but you just get dominated so much on the flops that you do connect with. So I chose to 3-bet it, planning on getting the pot down to heads up. It is a hand that's strong enough to call a 4-bet if I am 4-bet, although I won't be that happy about it. But it's just good to have some of these deceptive hands in your range, and when you are up against like a big pair like kings or aces, you're not in that bad a shape equity-wise. You're also, able to. You're really repping high cards when you do something like this. You're repping aces or kings, or like an ace-king, jack-10. So when the board comes high, a lot of the times if they don't nail it, you'll win it. And when the board comes low like this is pretty much the best possible flop, I guess. But when the board comes low like this, I think you get played back at a decent amount. So, same concept as last time. I'm going to go for a small bet here, hoping to get him to float or make a bluff, a check raise bluff. I think checking back here is an option. The only thing is if he has a hand like, I don't know, if he has like an ace-3, it'd be a disaster to let a club hit on the turn, or the board pair on the turn. If he has, I don't know, there are a few hands that would get it in here that you'd lose action from, which would be a disaster. But all in all, if you check behind, I think there are a lot of turns that he would fire on. So that's definitely a valid play. And, you know, it's good for your range, since a lot of times you whiff this flop and want to check behind some of those times. Even with, you know, with aces, you'd want to check this flop behind, and usually would check this flop behind a lot of the time. He thought about it for a little and folded. You know, no way to tell what that means. So here is a pretty good hand, king 10 9 8 with king high suit, and flop top pair, backdoor flush draw, and just c-bet it, pretty standard. I really like to have ace high and king high suits. I'm almost a little bit OCD about, like, if that same hand had an 8 high suit, I would consider it just like so much worse. Maybe even I might take it a little bit too far. But it is really important to have a high flush draw in your hand so that when the flush does hit, you're on the good side of it more often than the bad side of it. So here I flop pretty crappy wrap, low end of it, and I decided to check the flop. Pretty much with 4 people seeing the flop, I don't think that I'm going to get folds on the flop too often. I think that hands like, there'll be a lot of hands like king, queen, jack 10, or ace, queen, 10, 5 that'll call the flop, maybe even call the turn. I think that this is an okay spot to go for a 3-barrel against 1 or 2 people, but against 3 other opponents, I don't expect to get folds that often. So I just decided to check the flop. I would call a bet if Johnny decided to bet the flop. And now that the turn came a 10, I'm pretty much done with the hand. This is a board where you're going to get at least a lot of one-time calls on the turn at least. It is a good spot to bet twice if you do bet the turn and get called, depending on which person calls you, but a lot of players, I suspect, at lower stakes don't slow play queen jack here and would give me credit for it. So this would have been an okay spot to 2-barrel, I think, on the turn and river. But having not bet the turn, I'm not going to bet the river. I don't think that works well usually. The best hand was 10-4, which is, you know, pretty terrible, and probably would have folded to a bet, but I can't know that about their hands. And I just note that he's loose pre-flop there. I actually want to rewind this hand on the right. I didn't catch it. Okay, so Joe S&G 3 bets, gets called. Excuse me. And check raise is a drawy board. This is a really good board to check raise as a pre-flop 3-better. So I guess at the time I was playing this, I did not note that. I didn't pay attention to this hand. But if I was, I would. It's important to note whether somebody's capable of check raising a flop after 3-betting or not. And it's also important to, because I think Yoshi took some time before he folded. I guess we'll see this time around. King, 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 deuce is terrible hand. One less king and it becomes a good hand, but even with the suit it's not playable. Yeah, so it looks like Yoshi requests time here and goes into the tank, which means he bet on a board like this that put him in a tough spot, which is also something else that's interesting to note. You know, it's hard to say exactly how you'd use it other than in that exact same instance, but what I like to do with reads is just take any notes I have on somebody and add it up later. You know, it's sometimes if you learn a couple of spots where somebody plays something unusually, that'll clue you in as to how they're likely to be thinking and how they might react in other spots. Here on the right, I have pretty terrible kings. I think that I can play them for set value in position just to min raise in a pot that's likely to go multi-way. Now when it's 3 bets to 22, it's only 14 more, and again I think I'm priced in to, you know, try to hit like an open ender, an overpair, or a set basically, or obviously something like 2-pair trips. Being in position is a big part of it. Not as much with the hand like kings because you're mostly playing for set value, but in general, position is just so much more powerful in PLO than any other game as far as I know. Here when they both check to me on Jack 5-5, I think I have the best hand. I feel like Pizarro, after 3-betting, would continuation bet with aces or with the 5. And I think that once the preflop 3-better checks, I think that Nut would have bet with any 5. Most people, I feel like, don't really check raise in spots like that. Alright, so here on the left, I call a raise on the button with single-suited kings. Pretty weak ones, but single-suited kings I pretty much play in any position for one raise unless I think it's likely to get 3-bet. Flop an overpair and a flush draw and bottom pair. It's a very good flop for me. And I mean, it's pretty standard bet. Nothing to say about it. If I got check raised here, I'd be kind of unhappy. But I don't think I'd be able to fold my hand. You know, even against a set, I'm not in terrible shape. The only thing that has me in terrible shape is aces with the flush draw, where I'm pretty much dead. But you know, before I learn a lot about somebody, I can't really give them the benefit of the doubt, and he could have something like queens with a flush draw, or like bottom 2 pair, or even like a wrap with a pair, in which case I'm in very good shape. So I'd have trouble folding there. Ten-six, deuce-deuce, pretty much as bad a hand as you can get. So you'll probably see a lot of... I'm trying to remember back to the session. I don't think I did too much out of line. The way that I play most 6-handed PLO games, you know, even some of the higher stakes games, is just pretty straightforward. You obviously have to mix some things in and make some big calls and some big folds and some big bluffs, but for the most part, especially at like 5-10 and lower, from my experience, even at 10-20 when I've played, mostly people's leaks are they just overvalue weak draws and overvalue weak 2-pair type hands and don't know when to fold. So the way to exploit that for the most part is just to play stronger draws and play them aggressively and play, you know, flop top set when somebody else has bottom 2-pair and they go broke with it, and when you have bottom 2-pair you don't go broke with it. So for the most part, straightforward play is the way to go at lower stakes, and I'm sure you'll see me stray from quote-unquote straightforward play, but for the most part you'll see me playing spots pretty standard. I will 3-bet a decent amount in position and not so much out of position because position's so powerful. I think One big leak a lot of the players have, even in higher stakes, or maybe especially at higher stakes, that they 3-bet too much out of position. And I know I'm one of the tightest 3-betters out of position, along with, I guess David Benjamin 3-bets pretty tight out of position as well. But when you're deep stacked, it's really just really tough to play. All three streets, or 4 streets, I guess, but all 3 post-flop streets out of position, since they get to see how you react. Since on every street, often the board changes so that the nuts are different, and it can kind of drastically change the strength of your hand on every street. It's that much more of an advantage to be able to see how your opponent reacts to the street before you do. And that, coupled with the fact that it's hard to have that much of an equity edge pre-flop, makes it so that 3-betting out of position, even with pretty strong hands, ends up not being that profitable. Alright, so here I have very weak queens. I have a suit, but it's only 4 high, which is almost as good as not having a suit. I'll definitely open the button. I open a lot on the button. I bet I could even open more than I do on the button profitably. But I play against some people who 3-bet a whole lot. And here on the flop, it's actually a close spot. This is a spot where you hate to be check raised by a hand like, I mean, if you get check raised here by a hand like Jack 6, you get taken off a hand with a decent amount of equity. And spots where, a check raise could take you off a hand with a decent amount of equity, I try to err on the side of checking behind. That said, a bet here can be called by a decent amount of worse hands, low flush draws, kind of any flush draws, and I think a lot of jacks will call as well. I did go back and forth there. One of the other main reasons for betting is that on a board like this, there are a lot of hands that'll fold, like let's say Ace 10 7 6, which should fold, and if a hand like that called, you'd be fine with it when you have queens, but you're preventing them seeing a free card because you're never really that far ahead with just an overpair. And in PLO, especially against players who are not going to make life really tough on you, it becomes a game about protection a lot more than about value betting or bluffing. I know that, especially in No Limit, I harp on the fact that you need to have a reason for betting, and you're either going to be betting for value or betting as a bluff most of the time. But in PLO, it's often right to bet for protection. And that's one of those spots where I was kind of close, deciding between betting and checking, and protection is what made me finally decide on betting, which I think was the right play. Against players who pretty much never check raise without the nuts, like without sets, or like top 2 pair and a flush draw, you can c-bet a lot of boards. Alright, so here I call 3-bet and flop the nuts in a 3-way pot. I think that, while I'll check here occasionally, I think the best play is to bet kind of small. Either hopefully get a call from a hand like Ace King Jack 5 that just doesn't believe me, but you also don't want to give a low flush the chance to get away when the board pairs, or give a 2-pair hand free chance to suck out, something like that. But unfortunately, they both fold. So here on the right, this is actually an interesting spot on the flop. I call a raise out of position with King Queen Queen 6 with a King High suit, and flop top and bottom pair. And I was considering leading, but I didn't know how people would react to it. I was a little bit afraid I'd get bluff raised too often, which might have been kind of too much worrying by me. There's an expression that I can't think of right now that applies. Anyways, now when the turn hits, basically I expect to get floated on the flop a lot, and I wasn't sure how tough people would make it for me on a lot of the turns that change the board, which most turns do. And I also, was worried about getting bluff raised on the flop. Here on the turn, I think that I could check, and excuse me, if I do check, I don't know how I'm going to react to a bet. It's actually a pretty tough spot, and I'd probably have to fold to a bet. But I'd sometimes be folding the best hand, and even when I'm not folding the best hand, I'm folding a hand with, 4 outs to improve isn't a ton, but it's something. So I thought that the best play here would be to go ahead and bet. You do get called by worse occasionally, though not that often. But I do have the queens as blockers, and I was considering, depending on who called and what the river brought, I was considering bluffing the river. I think on a lot of blanks I would have bluffed the river. I'm not going to go too much into blockers since this isn't a beginner video, but having the two queens makes it less likely that anybody has the queen jack. I also felt that people wouldn't slow play too often, so the fact that I had the queens, and if I got called on the turn rather than raised, would have made me very confident that they didn't have a queen jack. Slow playing is often right in PLO on drawy boards, but I was not sure how many people knew that, especially at lower stakes. But that's a great spot to just call with queen jack. Maybe not great spot, but especially with a tight image where you're not going to get paid off that much with worse, you'll get people to bluff the river or value bet the lower straight and possibly call a raise. So here I 3-bet. 9-10 Jack Queen is a very good hand, but even still, it's towards the bottom of my 3-betting range out of position. But I think it's just good enough, and I completely missed the flop, but it's a very dry board, so definitely one that's good for a c-bet. I do have some backdoor draws, or just backdoor straight draws. And here on the left, I raised in the small blind when it was folded to me, and continuation bet the flop. And on this turn, it's actually, I think that either option's okay here, and by either option I mean check call or bet. I decided to check call. I think they're pretty close. I think bet might have been even better, but I felt that I guess I felt that he had draws that were not king jack often enough, and they would bet the turn a lot. Like, people float this board with any hearts most of the time, any jack 9, even like a 10-9-8 sometimes, things like that. And I want to give those a chance to bluff. That said, it's not a disaster if you bet and they fold their hand that had 9 outs or whatever. But since I have the king, it makes some of those straight draws a little weaker, given that I have a blocker. Here on the right, I just made a standard call pre-flop and a standard fold on the flop. So he did pot the turn, which I'm not all that happy about. I would have had a tough decision on a blank river. And on a spade river, it's actually pretty interesting, but the 9 makes it a board where pretty much everything hit besides hearts, so I think I actually would fold to a bet on this river. He luckily did have bottom pair and hearts. I still think my turn play is questionable. It could go either way, and I definitely would have folded this river. Given that I don't think people would turn hands like 10-9 into a bluff, or like if he had queen jack 9, something like that, I don't think they'd bluff with them. So most of the hands that missed are hearts. That's pretty much the only hand that missed. So most of the hands, what I'm saying is most of the hands that missed draws, quote unquote missed draws, hit 2 pair or something that most people would decide to check down. Even though in that spot I almost always have better than middle 2 pair. 3, 4, 5, 7 with a 5 high suit is not a great hand, but it's definitely good enough to see a flop in position. This is an example of why it's a pretty marginal hand. I flop a wrap, but it's a terrible wrap. I could already be drawing dead. A lot of my outs bring a 4-card straight or 3-card flush on the board. One check, too, I think could go either way. But I decided to check. I just felt that a board that connected, I'd get played back with. Not played back at, played with. I kind of combined those two phrases. But I felt that people would call a lot with a hand like Ace Queen 10-9 if they decided not to bet. Even like Ace Queen 9-8 with spades or something might check call. And those are hands that have me in kind of bad shape, just because a lot of some of my outs give them a higher straight. That said, I don't hate a flop bet. When the king hits the turn, I think that makes the board even more connected. You know, there are a ton of draws here. I was going to check behind again, and given that Joe bet, I'm just going to fold. There aren't really many great rivers for me. And that's one of those spots, I don't know if that seems standard to you or not, but I think that's a spot where some people might overplay a wrap just because, ooh, it's a wrap, it's, you know, not in bad shape against tough set. But I think people definitely overvalue their draws, or weak draws, just because they learn that they have a lot of outs against a set or an overpair or something like that, and don't consider the fact that you're in terrible, terrible shape against a lot of the draws that play with you. Alright, so here I have jacks with no suit. It's not strong enough to raise in the cutoff. I think I'd raise it on the button against players that don't 3-bet that frequently. And not too much going on. I'm not sure how I feel about 2-tabling videos as opposed to 4-tabling as when I play 6-handed. Obviously with heads-up videos, I think sometimes even 1 is okay, but I feel like there's a lot of moments with no action, especially when I'm trying to preach a style of kind of playing tight and straightforward, which I really do feel is the best way to play in most PLO games. In most no-limit games, I actually feel that if you're a skilled player, you should be playing a lot more loose and aggressive. But in PLO, unless you're playing with terrible, terrible players, as I said earlier, I just think that playing tight and aggressive and straightforward is the way to go, and the way to exploit all your loose opponents the most, at least. If there was a little jump in the action there, it's because I paused to blow my nose. I thought I'd spare you guys that. So really just a lot of folding now. Especially in the first two positions, I'm going to be really tight. In the cutoff and button, I'll open my game up a decent amount, and in the big blind against small blind raise, I'll be calling, you know, most hands probably. But if you're playing against decent players, they're going to make life hell for you when you're out of position. So even raising an early position with a pretty strong range, they'll be calling a lot and 3-betting a lot, and it's tough to counter. Here I should not have clicked fold. This is a hand I would open. There's Jack 10-9-3 with a Jack high suit. I'd open that on the button if folded to. I definitely would have folded to a raise, but I don't like that I auto-folded it. And here's a very good hand. Queen Jack 10-8 with a Queen high suit. It's pretty much a premium hand. You got the queen high suit. You got a lot of connectedness. That hand 2 4 5 6. There's some connectedness there, but with no suit and the gap and the cards being low, it's not a great hand. I think people overvalue their low card hands quite a lot. Hands like I feel like people overvalue hands like Ace King Deuce 3 double suited or 2 3 4 5 with one suit. I know I played that hand earlier, but it's not a very powerful hand. None of those are. Here I have, a somewhat connected double suited hand. One of my suits is only 7 high though, and I'm out of position, and the Jack 10's not great. You can see by my mouse motion that I wasn't happy about having to fold, but excuse me, wasn't happy about having to fold, but I think it's the right play. Jack 5 4 3 is a pretty good hand. The Jack helps you in that it gives you a higher suit, but you'd much rather have like a 7 or 6. I was considering, oh okay, I did 3-bet. I thought I decided to call here, but it's another one of those spots. I am okay with my 3-bet because it is a hand that I'd rather play heads up than multi-way. Your straights are not that great multi-way, and your flushes usually aren't either. But it is a hand that, plays well against kings or aces or high card hands, and you have some deception. This is, in either of the blinds, this is an absolute insta-fold, but being on the button, I think it's just so powerful. Being on the button, that is, that's so powerful. You can call or re-raise with it. And I flopped top pair on a drawy board, and this is a very, very easy check behind, in my opinion. You get check raised off your hand. You get check raised off the best hand sometimes, and you're getting played with too often. You have the backdoor straight draw, which you can see I hit here. So you'd rather just see a turn and take things from there. Keep the pot small. You don't want all your money going in on that flop, or even this turn. I don't want all my money going in. So if I bet and he called and then led this turn, I have to fold. So once again, I think I should check back the turn. There aren't many hands that will call me that I want to call me, and I'm not all that worried about giving him a free card, just because I feel like a lot of the hands that have good equity are either check raising or leading the turn, rather than check calling or check folding. Obviously, they're not check folding. So now when the 9 hits, I can consider turning my hand into a bluff. But I thought it was a little bit too likely that he had some kind of draw that backed into a straight, or would just not believe me with 2 pair, given that I checked behind twice. I basically thought, this is a lot more credible for him to rep than for me, since a lot of my hands that would now have a straight would have bet at some point in the hand. Although this is how I would play king-queen with nothing else. If I had like a I don't know, even like, well, king queen 10 I might bet and get it in, but like king queen 8-7, let's say, I'd probably play like this. But that said, I decided to check behind, and he actually did have king queen jack. So I'm not exactly sure what his plan was on the flop. On the turn. On the flop he was probably check shoving, and on the turn, I think I pull up the hand history here so I don't have to rewind it. I'm having some trouble getting to 12 there. Yeah, on the turn, he has still his open-ender in top pair. I guess he didn't want to bet and get raised by, if 8-9 is definitely a hand I would check behind here with a lot of the cards that go with it. So he's going for check call in the turn, which is something I didn't expect to happen that often with a hand this strong, but I like his play. On all streets, actually, I like his play. One thing he should consider is leading the flop. I don't think that it's a mandatory lead. I think it's more standard check than lead. But if somebody's going to be 3-betting you really wide in position, you have to be leading some flops. Otherwise, you give them the opportunity to decide, what pots they want to play, when they want to make a big pot and when they don't. You let them decide to check it behind, things like that. And you can put them in some pretty tough spots by leading with hands that you're either happy to get in or, don't have much equity, but some equity that can't really check raise or check call, but would rather not check fold. Here I'm taking notes and almost timing out. But I get my c-bet in with 3-pair. And I'm not going to use these notes that often. I mean, like in this session. It's just a short session, but I still think it's important to take notes. It's kind of a habit of mine now. And, I wanted to show you what I would do if I really was playing this game. Alright, so here I need to find some more tables maybe, since games are breaking. I actually do think it'd be pretty cool to just do like a 3 or 4-handed video, but I thought it was pretty likely that the games would break. So this is the table I was playing before that broke. That's now not broken. So I think I'm going to replace it with that. Big pot here, but I didn't see any of the action, so that table wasn't up. It's pretty interesting bet size by game over. It's usually a spot where people don't value bet all that thin. So I'd expect either, usually when people can be value betting more thinly, a smaller bet size is a good way to get value out of worse hands, but in a spot like this, I feel like his value betting range is pretty polarized, or most people's are. But I guess we don't get to see. Here on the right table, was this 6-handed? If this was 6-handed, I don't. Okay, it was 5-handed. It's a marginal raise 5-handed. I don't love it, and 6-handed I think it's definitely a fold. Let's get back to shoot. Okay, I think it's definitely a fold 6-handed. So here on the flop, I have top pair and 3 overs on a pretty connected board, but a low board. And I think the best play here is just to bet and hope to take it down. You obviously have to fold to a raise, but I think this bet takes it down often enough. If you do get called by a hand like 10s with clubs or a 4 with clubs, something like that, you have good equity. Or not good equity, but some equity. I actually didn't notice that, I noticed game over, asked if I was making a video, and I responded, but I didn't notice the rest of his chat, so. I assume you're probably watching then, if you said you love the site, and are suggesting some things. So, sorry for not responding. I was actually doing a lot of things while recording this play. I've been really busy since, last week. I had friends in town for basically the entire week, and they're people I haven't seen in a while, so I kind of dropped everything for the week and had a lot of work piled up. I've kind of been getting to that the last few days. and it's been made a little bit more difficult since I have a cold. I'm also like a huge baby when I'm sick. Like when I have a little bit of a cold, I don't do anything and take so many like over-the-counter drugs for it, which probably doesn't help that much. Ace King 10-3 is a hand that I used to overvalue, I think because when I started playing PLO I played short stacked, and it's a pretty good hand short stacked. Deep stack is not a very good hand. You have the ace high suit, but the 3 hurts you a lot, and your Ace King 10 plays together kinda well, but you're not going to really flop any straight draws, or many straight draws. I call here, and I think it's actually pretty marginal. I think I'd probably prefer a fold. So here on the flop I decide to lead, and I think this is a good board for leading. There are a lot of different reasons to lead, but one of the things that I'll kind of use to make that decision is the fact that here I have a hand that has some outs and some backdoor outs, but is not strong enough to check call. I could choose to check raise with a hand like this, but in general, like I said, I play pretty straightforward, so I'm not check raising with this few outs that often on a board this drawy. And now when he calls, it's actually a pretty good spot to two barrel, I feel. Even though, you know, if you're leading, you should expect to get folds a decent amount. I do feel that a lot of hands will call here. Like basically any queen will call one. Even a hand like King 10-9 will call one bet, and a lot of them will fold a turn. Also, like kings or aces will call the flop and then fold a turn, especially when the 6 completes a straight. So I think this gets enough folds. Another thing to consider is that he didn't raise, so that takes a lot of the stronger hands out of his range. Like, you know, big draws or sets, things like that. Takes at least some combos of those out of his range. So I don't think this is like a lead that a two barrel that's going to work all the time, but I think it works often enough to do it. And it's obviously important to have in your game, so that you don't always have the nuts when you bet twice here. My leads in general are pretty strong, but then I mix in a lot of weak hands like that. Any suited ace here on the left, I raise on the button. Can't think of a suited ace that I don't raise. Most suited aces actually raise in the cutoff as well. Queen Jack Jack 9 is a good hand, not a great hand. Your hand works together. You do have jacks, which is a nice pair to have. Jack high flush draw is okay, but it's pretty easy raise from the cutoff. And I get called by the button pretty quickly, and we see a flop three-way. It's another one of those spots where obviously I have a pretty bad hand, but I think the best play is just a continuation bet it. You do get to showdown without any more bets going in sometimes and have the best hand. And it's kind of like spots like this. This is like just trying to make a comparison to No Limit. This is really like your bluff. Sorry, like the bluff part of your range consists of hands like gut shots, and then hands like this, like one pair hands that could end up being the best hand at showdown, but don't want to get a lot of money in. I think most people have trouble with the concept of betting an overpair as a bluff, but it's essentially the bluff part of your range, and you should be betting hands like this. One, just to take down the pot, and then two, to balance with your super strong hands. And this is not a board. If I had like ace, king, 10, 4 with no suits, I would not continuation bet this board. Because of the times that, I know it's pretty similar to jacks, but in terms of, you know, being a terrible hand, jack sometimes gets the showdown and wins the pot. And you could even, on some turns, go check check and make some hero calls on the river and be right. whereas with Ace King 10 you need to improve to do that. One thing I do want to talk about, probably we'll have to get into it more next video because it didn't come up that often, but I think a lot of people transitioning from no limit to PLO continuation bet way too much. Just because, in no limit, most boards miss most people, and it's pretty, it takes down the pot often enough most of the time to continuation bet with any hand, but in PLO that's not the case at all, especially in three-way pots. You have to be giving up a whole lot. And I guess this is actually a decent place to wrap up the video and have enough footage for one or two more. So I'll stop here, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully for my next installment of it I won't be sick anymore. Definitely let me know your feedback, and if you liked the two-table format, if you didn't like it, if you want me to be playing higher stakes PLO, lower stakes PLO, whatever. Good luck. Take care, guys. This has been Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com.